voice. You know what we do by now. We put veterans in the forefront, and we listen to their stories, and we get some advice from them for you military transitioners leaving the armed forces. So today I have ex-RAF, ex-Chinook pilot James Earl. How are you doing, James?
Very well, thank you, Matt. How are you?
I'm not too bad, and thank you very much for joining us. And we'll just tell everybody that you were a very short notice join, because I had you down for next week, as I did another person, and you agreed just to come forward a week. So thank you very much for that. Otherwise, it would have been a very long show, me talking.
That's my pleasure.
So couple of questions. Do you wear clogs?
I don't. I've never really understood it personally, but there are a number of farmers around me that, when they leave their house, and if you come to their driveway, they'll walk outside wearing wooden clogs, and it is a real thing, not just for the tourists, but it's not something I don't think I could ever bring myself to do.
Yeah. So just for those people that don't know, James actually lives out in the Netherlands now. After, and we'll come on to it, flying with their Air Force for a bit. So you cite yourself as being a very enthusiastic talker about aviation. So what's all that about you?
I mean, for anyone that knew me when I was back in the military, I think most people would describe me as being fairly outspoken. My opinion wasn't always appreciated by everybody, and it wasn't always 100% correct. But since I've joined the commercial aviation world, or at least the civil aviation world, I've continued to kind of push people's buttons and press the kind of the accepted norms, certainly within electric aviation and within drones, because I don't always believe the narrative is 100% accurate, but it does represent the future, and I'm hugely enthusiastic about where this is all going and what it can actually mean for everybody. And urban air mobility, which is where I'm currently working, is it is a complete change in how we currently look at moving around and how green we can create travel with, at least with air travel.
Yeah, and it is fantastic just seeing some of the stuff that's out there. It's just limited by the mind, I think, at the moment. So if you are listening, then drop a comment in. We usually have people listening, and I can see we have people listening. So please say hi in the comments where you are, how you know James, and fire in some questions if you like. So just give us a little bit of a background into your military career, James.
So I joined in 2005, a fairly normal type of IoT, EFT, DHS, DHFS, and then onto the Chinook OCU. For me, back in 2005 to 2009, when I was in flying training, that was a fairly normal period of training. I know that MFTS is struggling a bit at the moment, and a 4-year period from sort of frontline, or from ab initio to frontline, is now not really heard of, but that was my kind of period going through. And then 2010 was onto the front line in Odiham, then straight out to Afghanistan, did a number of tours with 27 Squadron. And then 2012, I was given the option of coming to Holland and doing the exchange tour, which was unfortunately sort of the end of the exchange tour period with the Dutch, but I was the last one here. And I did that until 2016, and then went back to the UK until 2018 when I PVR'd.
And you stayed out. You stayed out in the Netherlands, or you came back to the UK, but you went out to the Netherlands because you ended up marrying Dutch.
I did, and of the all the horrible pilot cliches, I ended up marrying an air traffic controller.
Yeah.
Not that she ever controlled the kind of direct airspace that I was in. We spoke once on the radio, which most people know this story that know me, but I was invited through one of her colleagues who was controlling me at the time, and I was heading sort of just north of Rotterdam, and I was invited to move to another frequency to speak to my wife. I thought it was a silent frequency, so I then started rambling on about stuff. It turns out it was Eindhoven approach, and so I was butting in amongst Transavia and Ryanair aircraft that were trying to land. So I was invited very quickly by my wife to get off the frequency and not contact her again.
Right. But you persisted and ended up getting married. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I persisted.
Yeah. So we've got inbound from Odiham. So do you know Chris?
I don't, but based on his post nominals, I think he's an engineer, and I only ever knew the engineers that we had at 27B that we deployed with, and so I was, unfortunately, I didn't really get a huge amount of time to speak to everybody else that was out there in the engineering team.
Yeah, but well, thanks anyway for Chris for joining in as we say thanks to Carl, and also whoever LinkedIn user is, please let us know who you are, because we're obviously not connected at the moment. So and that's why we're not a first level connection. And so let us know who you are and where you stay. So you left the RAF and carried on into aviation.
Correct. I knew sort of in 2017-ish that the RAF really wasn't working out for me. The Odiham post-Afghan was a bit disappointing, considering the way the Dutch had been approaching the post-Afghan kind of reset. So I realized that I probably need to go and do something else, and I didn't want to be that sour grape within the unit that was constantly moaning. So I thought, get out before I become that person. And very luckily, through a family connection, essentially my cousin, who I know, Mohammed, he kind of introduced me to my new boss, who was a guy called Don Chinooks, out in Canada, and I joined a company called S&C Lavalin, who really didn't care where I lived, because my work was very global, and so I was given the opportunity to go where I want, and that's when me and my wife chose to go back to Holland.
Smashing. So Mohammed here from Toulouse, makers of the best sausages in the world, bar none. So welcome, Mohammed. But so you went out, you worked for S&C Lavalin for a little bit, and you've stayed out in the Netherlands ever since.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people get this when they go on an exchange tour, but you kind of get thrown into such a different world, and you're so isolated. I mean, at least if you are part of an isolated exchange program, that you're kind of forced to build a completely new world. And that's what I did. And kind of the friendship group that I built up around the town that I live in meant that I didn't really want to go through that again. I had no interest in trying to build that somewhere else. And so it was the natural thing to kind of move back out here and then continue, whilst potentially a dangerous plan, but to try and get either remote jobs that kept me here, or find work in the local area. And luckily, everything that I did was either remote, or my latest role, which is only 35 minutes down the road.
Very nice, and so very. Mark, we're from Jersey, so are we across the pond? Do you know Mark?
I don't know.
No. I've not come across Mark, so I've been. It's about one of the only places I've been in the US is Jersey. So
I think
how was
that might be Jersey, Guernsey, Jersey.
Oh right, okay. I was thinking I was having a Bruce Springsteen head on there. So, what was your transition like? How did that go?
For me, it was actually really easy. I joined a company that was pretty much all ex-military guys. I mean, my direct boss, a guy called Dave Rook, who was an absolute legend in the Canadian helicopter world. And then the couple other people I worked with either were sort of long-term defense civilians, or they've been in defense themselves. So that part of the transition into the civilian world was very, very simple. The kind of direct move from the military into the first civilian company was also very simple, because I didn't really have much time to think about it. I mean, it was I finished at Odiham, moved back over to Holland, which was simply a normal move, and then immediately flew out to Canada and started my job there, and was out there for sort of 3 or 4 weeks, and then started flying around the world doing what I was meant to be doing. So I didn't really struggle too much in that sense, but it's because I kind of landed in a role that was primarily full of ex-military and doing a job that was mostly linked to deployed aviation in places that I knew. I had a contract with a couple of MI8s in Mali, where I'd only been deployed just 2 years earlier. So, I knew the ground, I knew the people, I knew the tasks they were doing. So it was quite simple to kind of transition into that. So, from my point of view, that was probably the easiest of transitions, because it represented just a different uniform, but almost exactly the same world.
Sounds like with the knowledge you had, you were quite a good catch for them anyway.
Yeah, I was just lucky in that one that they, just the contracts they had in place already lined up with where I'd been recently. So it was, there's a bit of luck in that.
Yeah. So just a good evening to Dan there. Dan was last week's guest, and welcome back again. So how did you land the role you're in at the moment?
Oh, with Bayards, through social media. Back in sort of 2018, when I first joined S&C Lavalin, I kind of started using LinkedIn, although probably quite terribly when I look back in comparison to how I use it now. But I realized that this was quite an incredible tool, really, that I hadn't ever considered, especially during my military days. We certainly weren't considered to be. It wasn't a sensible idea to be really active on social media, especially when you're deployed. But yeah, I kind of started that in 2018, and then the last few years I've become more and more active and gained a bit of a following in terms of my opinions on various things within the eVTOL and drone industry. And this company, the marketing manager, Alexandra, who's one of my colleagues now, she reached out to me fairly blind and said, we've got a potential opening. Do you want to come and talk about it? Which I did. And they ended up offering me a role in Bayards, which it kind of gave me an opportunity to do something a bit different to what I'd done before. But it was entirely through LinkedIn. I mean, without LinkedIn, they wouldn't have known I existed. I wouldn't have even known that company existed. And I don't think they would have carried out the same kind of interview and selection process they did without the power of my profile. Probably that sounds really corny.
Yeah, I'll give you that one. This is one of the things that, because I do a little bit of coaching for military transitioners, but this is one of the things we teach, and you've done exactly that. You've become a subject matter, or you were a subject matter expert, but you're sharing your knowledge with the network, and the network is recognizing that the value of your contribution, and that you're actually somebody that needs to be listened to, and you've got that inbound coming in, and that takes a little bit of time, but it is achievable. And all of the roles that I've had over the last 2 or 3 years have all been found through LinkedIn social media. Yeah,
and I can't remember who it was that said it. I think it's Justin Welsh, who, if people aren't following him, he's well worth following. He's going to hate me for saying this, not that I know him, but it's a very military phrase, but he's what I'd like to refer to as part of the self-licking lollipop part of LinkedIn, which it sustains itself by sustaining LinkedIn. They're talking about building side hustles on LinkedIn, and so it's the audience is a lot broader than everyone else's audience. But he often posts about the kind of, if you look at the total population of LinkedIn, let's say it's 100%, 90% are lurkers, 9% do something, and 1% or do something like just react, and 1% actually post. So you don't have to be absolutely brilliant. You just have to put yourself in the 1%, because there are so many people out there that have profiles that do nothing more than just have a profile. And if you want to get more visibility, all you have to do is just start talking about what you do, because everybody's a subject matter expert in something, even if it's in the transition you're currently doing. And so I kind of took that on board to some degree, but I liked the kind of the idea behind it, and that's how I started building what has become my little network of people that discuss various drone or eVTOL things with me.
Yeah. And that's a really important point you make just there, is becoming the subject matter expert, because for those people in military transition, or veterans, or anybody looking for work, you are the subject matter expert in yourself. So, and it's not about being narcissistic and saying how great you are. It's giving the people the insight into you as a person, and then saying, actually, I could really do with that person in my organization.
And a really good example of that is now I've forgotten his name, but the guy who owns a company called Earl Resupply Coffee in the US, and he set up a counter brand to like the Black Rifle coffee company, which obviously has it's very divisive in terms of its political allegiances. But and he's just posted pretty much every day about his journey of setting up a company as a veteran, and you can't accuse him of not being a subject matter expert, because he is the subject matter expert in his transition to building a company. And it's really interesting to read it, and you can see the struggles he's having and that kind of stuff. And a lot of people think they need something to say on LinkedIn, but in reality, you don't. You just need to say something that you're confident about what you're saying, and you can gain a following just from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, social media has been fairly instrumental in both our growth over the past couple of years. Anything you would do differently now, having left the armed forces, not being social media aware?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to bash them at all, because we spoke about this yesterday, but CTP is fantastic, and the reason I say that is because I live in Holland now. In the Dutch military, if you leave, you get like a whatever your time to run is, and then they shake your hand and you hand in your stuff and you're gone. There is no CTP. There is no after transition. There's no people calling you up after 2 months to see if your job search is going all right. CTP is really good, but I think it misses just how powerful LinkedIn can be, and an idea about how you can start to use LinkedIn, even if you're still in the military, but in that, your resettlement period. And I think if I'd have done that earlier, regardless of finding jobs, I think I'd have been far more successful in my business development roles earlier if I'd have understood the power of LinkedIn earlier. But like everything, it's just an experience thing, and you continue to learn, and failing isn't a problem as long as you continue to learn from it.
Yeah, as long as you put your failings into your learnings into action.
But that's probably the only thing I would, that in terms of, if you had to pick one thing that I'd like to do differently, then I think LinkedIn, understanding it earlier would have been more appropriate.
Yeah, and for people in the UK military, there are actually guidelines for using social media on the government website. And if you go onto my profile, into one of the articles, picture of secret squirrel thing, but there is guidance on using LinkedIn and social media whilst being in the armed forces, and there's a whole armed forces description on how to use it and how to apply it. So and nowadays a lot of military campaigns are actually incorporate social media, because that's how they make people aware. I mean, look at what's happening in Ukraine. It is not only a physical war, it's a social media war as well. So so just give us a little bit about tell us a little bit about some of the voluntary some of the other elements you do on the side. You mentioned side hustles earlier on, but you do a little bit with Dove Air and the Jet Perfect Foundation.
Yeah, and again, that's all LinkedIn based. I mean, the Jet Perfect Foundation was first a guy called Ernest, who's a bit of a legend in the aviation world. He set up this foundation on the west coast of the US, and was looking for people to kind of sit on the board of directors. And the whole idea is that we kind of, it's a charitable foundation, and it sponsors white papers and university study looking at future propulsion technologies for aviation. And I've been involved in that since its inception with Ernest. But again, I've never met Ernest in person. We've spoken a large number of times. We're often on video calls together. But he reached out to me because of LinkedIn, and because of what I was doing in the advanced air mobility space. And Dove Air is Francisco, who's probably the craziest person I know in terms of his working ethic. He doesn't seem to really understand how to relax very well. But he's the founder of a company called Dove Air, which is based in Africa, doing ISR and cargo work. And he invited me to be a strategic advisor on the company, which is purely to do with my knowledge of sort of drone platforms and the technical specifications as they go to scale, and how they can do that effectively without spending huge amounts of money on platforms that they often either lose or crash, or have other technical issues. So again, I've never met Francisco in real life. We speak quite regularly, but it was all to do with LinkedIn and sort of interacting on various comments on particular posts or anything like that you get in touch with people, and you see people posting things, you think, well, that's an interesting perspective, and then you just reach out to them, chat, and and that's how it all starts. But all of that has come about because of LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we first met. We've never met. We met on LinkedIn. I think I tried to tap you up for a little contract at Medini or something at one point, and we had a conversation. But
because you worked at Cyberhawk for a while, and
I did, yeah.
And when I was working at S&C-Lavalin, not my department, but we as S&C-Lavalin were contracting Cyberhawk to do the flare inspections on the Hibernian platform out in Nova Scotia at the time. And so, I'd known about, about Chris and the team and Phil and what Cyberhawk were doing. I mean, internally, never actually got any further than that, but there were discussions very early on about should we create a drone inspection capability, given we were an infrastructure company. One of the conversations that came up was very quickly, 30 seconds, but should we buy Cyberhawk? That was, obviously that was never tabled beyond that, but that's I kind of knew about Cyberhawk, and then I saw that you'd worked there, and there was other stuff, but I mean, it was all through LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've gone from strength to strength, and they've grown significantly. Chris is probably going like this now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only one company between them and Aerodyne in terms of the largest infrastructure scanning company in the world. In Aerodyne operate a completely different model. I mean, they have all these people, but it's almost like they've got drone pilots on standby everywhere, and then they call them up when things are needed. Whereas Cyberhawk are full-time employees with their crazy yellow Jeeps, and they're just busy all the time. It's a great company. I'm really happy that it's a UK company, a Scottish company. But they're doing some great things globally.
Yeah, it's a great little company. Got a lot of affection for Cyberhawk. What would your advice, if you were to give your veterans voice to military transitioners? I know you've given us a little bit about what you would do differently, but if you were to give military transitioners your advice, your veterans voice, what would it be?
I mean, the most important, and this is just my experience, so I can't speak for everybody, but my experience has been that network is everything. Your network is the way that, and CTP do talk about it, but they don't often tell you then how to do it. But understanding your network, who you speak to, what they have in terms of their network, and the power of recommendation it's so difficult to get a job by just blindly applying and not knowing anyone in the company, because you just become another piece of paper. And in the military, generally, people undersell themselves because they don't understand the value of their experience. And so they'll write a throwaway comment in a single line saying, manage X, Y, and Z. But that, if you translate that into civilian terms, that's a multi-million-dollar, a multifaceted, complex project that you manage from inception to deployment. That is, and just the way that you translate that is so different. And so understanding your network and being able to put yourself in front of people so you can explain that properly is just invaluable in comparison to just submitting a blind CV. And I think it's something we mentioned back when we spoke a long time ago, and I'm still a huge advocate of it, is that what makes people as veterans completely different to the civilian workforce is that as a veteran, certainly in the UK Armed Forces, but I imagine it's fairly consistent across the board, you're generally faced with a circumstance that somebody is asking you to achieve the impossible and giving you only half the tools to do it. Yeah. And you always get there, and it takes some pretty interesting resourcefulness and some pretty good out of the box thinking, but generally you'll get there. Now, in the civilian world, that's not the norm, that people are asked to achieve the impossible and then only given half the tools to get there. And people that I speak to generally underestimate just how important that is for a business. And if you can translate that and make people understand that you are already experienced in dealing with managing very complex projects without getting all the tools to do it, and you won't moan and you won't go back to them and just say it's not possible, that is incredibly important, regardless of whether you've got a degree in social sciences or any of that stuff. That experience is really valuable, and I think that's often underestimated. And if you can vocalize that and make that part of the narrative within your CV or within your interview, I think that makes a huge difference to your chances.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dave has just chipped in. Totally agree. David is another a veteran's voice veteran, I couldn't say it better myself. The resourcefulness and the JFDI attitude and the work ethic is second to none. So and make sure you learn the language of your chosen market, and translate your speaking to that language.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would recommend people to do. I mean, I like promoting other people because it's the way to do it. But there's a guy on LinkedIn called Austin Belchak, and his entire LinkedIn profile and everything he does, his company, is based around the idea that you can land whatever job you want without actually having to apply for it. And so, if you follow him and look at what he's talking about, which is essentially, go out there, understand the company you're trying to get involved in, follow people in that company, start talking to them, start understanding their pain points before you even go to apply, and then, really have I'm not going to try and sell his entire thing, but just read what he's talking about. And his entire method is, don't apply for jobs normally, do the background beforehand, do the research, and then apply through these backward channels, basically, and you've got a much higher success. So if people aren't following him, just Austin Belchak on LinkedIn, he'll put one of the top hits because he's got millions of followers. But his methodology speaks for itself. It's very, very good, and it's well worth following.
Yeah, absolutely. I have connected or followed him. Now, Trish has made a point, and I mentioned it at the start. I double booked this week, and I got James and another for next week, and so James magnanimously agreed to come forward a week, so I had to just cancel one of them. So you were invited on both, by the way, Trish. But no, I think that neatly brings us to the end of a session. And before we just go, just a couple of minutes, just tell us what the future of UAV aviation looks like in James's mind, because you are famous or infamous, one of the two, for being able to wax lyrical about it.
Well, I mean, within the UAV world, at least within the UK, I think we're facing a pretty big, kind of a big challenge right now, where the regulator is certainly prohibiting innovation in some degree. And the best way to explain that is that, we are constantly being faced with the challenge of being as good as or better than the manned equivalent. But when you're talking about unmanned systems, and certainly autonomous systems, it's digital. So you're talking about ones and zeros, software programming. So how can you be as good as or better than let's say, and it's always in Holland, they always talk about the dentist that flies 3 times a year in a Cessna 172. How good is his lookout? What can he actually see? At what distance? How can I then be as good as that when you're talking about digital, outputs? So until the regulator comes up with some sensible answers to that question, which is going to have implications to the general aviation fleet, then it's going to be very difficult to unlock airspace in the UK to actually achieve significant progress. And significant progress isn't segregated airspace and these drone corridors, as they refer to them. Drone corridors are just the worst idea in the world. People say that they are a step forward. They're not. We've been doing segregated drone BVLOS flights for the last 30 years. The US military was doing BVLOS segregated flights in the 1990s. We don't need to prove the technology anymore. We need to prove the integration, and corridors don't do that. So until we achieve that part of regulatory change, we're not going to get anywhere. And what you'll see is more people fleeing the UK and setting up businesses abroad where they do have access to that kind of airspace. The VTOL world, it's going to come down to funding. Honestly, it's a multi-billion-dollar game, and if you haven't raised the money now, the VC world is basically collapsing in on itself. Most companies that have gone through the SPAC or IPO route have already given up a significant portion of their company to get the money they wanted. If they don't have enough money right now to get to entry into service or min viable product, or heaven forbid to manufacturing for a full scale prototype, then to go for new money now, you've weakened and diluted the value of your company so much that it's going to cost you a huge amount to get there again. So I would say that in the VTOL world, look at those who have already raised enough money. So in the US, the Archers, the Jobies, and within the UAV world, look at those who are actively pushing the regulation. And when they move, which some of them will, because they'll be sick of the the restrictions that are being imposed in some countries, when they move, you'll see that will start to change the regulator, because economically it'll become a challenge to continue to allow a regulator to restrict access.
That's really, really interesting insight. Yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought of it like that, and that's pretty spot on, I think. Brilliant. Right. Well, it just leaves me to say thank you very much, James, for your time and for jumping in and giving us the great insights. And I hope there's a few military veterans that benefit from that. And thank you very much for everybody for joining us and jumping in with the comments. And we will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Right, cheers.
Bye.